Store owner refuses man in BLM hat, then discovers he's a senator. How will this story escalate? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The small-town convenience store, nestled at the corner of a bustling intersection, was usually a hub of chatter and warmth. Bright fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the aisles of neatly arranged products. The handwritten "Support Local Business" sign on the entrance door fluttered slightly every time a customer walked in. This was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, or so it seemed. It was a warm Friday afternoon when the tranquility of the day was abruptly shattered. The store owner, a stout middle-aged woman named Deborah, stood behind the counter with her arms crossed. Her sharp, watchful eyes scanned every person who entered her store. She prided herself on being a guardian of her business, though others saw her as unwelcoming to those who didn't fit her version of the town's norm. The doorbell chimed, signaling another customer. A man in his mid-30s entered, his presence immediately drawing attention. He was dressed casually in a black BLM cap, jeans, and a crisp button-down shirt. His demeanor was calm yet confident. As he adjusted his cap, Deborah's gaze turned cold. "Can I help you?" Deborah's tone was sharp, almost accusatory as she stepped out from behind the counter. The man paused, glancing at her. "Just looking to grab a few things," he replied with a polite nod, unfazed by her icy reception. As he began walking down the aisles, Deborah's irritation grew. She followed him closely, her footsteps loud and deliberate. Other customers in the store exchanged nervous glances, sensing the tension brewing. A young mother holding her child stepped away from the scene, uneasy about what might unfold. "I haven't seen you around here before," Deborah remarked pointedly, standing a little too close for comfort. "You from out of town?" "Yes, just visiting," the man replied without looking back, his attention focused on a shelf of granola bars. "Thought I'd stop by and support a local business." "Support?" Deborah scoffed. "Funny choice of words, considering your hat." She gestured toward his BLM cap, her expression twisted with disdain. The man froze for a moment, then turned to face her. "Is there a problem with my hat?" His voice was calm, but his gaze was unflinching. Deborah folded her arms, her voice dripping with condescension. "We don't take kindly to political statements in here. This is a family-friendly establishment." The man raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. "This isn't a political statement. It's about equality and justice." Deborah laughed bitterly. "Equality? Justice? Spare me the lecture. I know exactly what that hat stands for, and it's not welcome in my store." The conversation caught the attention of other shoppers. An elderly man in the corner pretended to browse the refrigerated section, but his ears were clearly tuned in. A teenager scrolling on his phone paused, watching the confrontation unfold. "I'm just here to buy groceries," the man said firmly. "I didn't come here to debate or cause trouble." Deborah stepped closer, her voice growing louder. "Well, you've caused trouble the moment you walked in with that hat. Maybe you should take your business elsewhere." The man sighed, setting down the granola bar he had picked up. "Is this how you treat all your customers, or just the ones who don't look like you?" His words were measured but carried a sharp edge. Deborah's face turned red. "Don't play the victim here," she snapped. "This is my store, and I have the right to refuse service to anyone." "Refusing service because of a hat?" the man countered, his calm demeanor unwavering. "Or is there more to it?" The tension in the store was palpable. A few customers discreetly left, not wanting to get involved. Others stayed, their curiosity outweighing their discomfort. The young mother, now standing near the door, whispered to her child to stay quiet as she watched the exchange unfold. Deborah was about to respond when a voice from the back of the store interrupted. "Is everything okay here?" It was a tall man in his 50s, wearing a plaid shirt and carrying a basket of items. He looked at Deborah, then at the man in the BLM hat, his expression one of concern. "Everything's fine," Deborah said curtly, though her tone suggested otherwise. This gentleman was just about to leave. The man in the hat held his ground. "I wasn't planning on leaving until I got what I came for." "Well, you're not welcome here," Deborah shot back, her voice rising. "So I suggest you do." The older man with the basket stepped forward. "Deborah, maybe you should calm down. He's just trying to shop like everyone else." Deborah glared at him. "This is my store, Tom. I'll run it how I see fit." Tom hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The man in the hat turned to him. "Thank you, but I don't need anyone to fight my battles. I just need to know, do you agree with her?" Tom opened his mouth, then closed it, unsure of how to respond. The room seemed to hold its breath. Before anyone could say more, the man in the hat gave a small nod. "All right," he said, his tone calm but resolute. "If that's how you want to run your business, I'll take my money elsewhere." As he turned to leave, Deborah smirked triumphantly. "Good riddance," she muttered, loud enough for him to hear. He paused at the door, looking back over his shoulder. "You know, you should be careful about who you turn away. You never know who might be walking through your doors." With that, he left, the bell above the door chiming softly. The store fell silent, the weight of the moment lingering in the air. Deborah huffed, muttering to herself as she returned to the counter. Tom exchanged uneasy glances with the other customers before resuming his shopping. The young mother, clutching her child, whispered, "That wasn't right," but said nothing more. Outside, the man adjusted his hat, a thoughtful expression on his face. He pulled out his phone, typing something quickly before slipping it back into his pocket. His calm demeanor belied the storm brewing in his mind. Little did Deborah know, this was not the last she would see of him. And the lesson she was about to learn would leave her, and the entire town, shaken. Deborah had no idea what she had set in motion. Inside the store, she carried on as though nothing had happened, brushing aside the unease that lingered among her remaining customers. She didn't care. In her mind, she had made the right decision. "I won't tolerate nonsense like that," she muttered under her breath as she adjusted the cash register. The other customers, however, didn't share her confidence. Tom, still standing by the bread aisle, couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that what had just happened was fundamentally wrong. He watched Deborah, whose expression was now a mix of smugness and irritation, and hesitated. Was it his place to speak up? Would it even matter? Meanwhile, outside the store, the man in the BLM hat, whose name was Marcus, leaned against his car. He wasn't angry, but he was disappointed. This wasn't the first time he had faced such blatant disrespect, but it stung every time. He sighed, taking out his phone again. Scrolling through his contacts, he found the name he was looking for and tapped it. The phone rang twice before a confident voice answered on the other end. "Marcus, good to hear from you. What's going on?" Marcus smiled slightly at the familiar voice. "Hey Jordan. I need a favor. Are you still in town?" "For you? Always," Jordan replied. "What's up?" "I had an interesting experience just now at a little convenience store on 3rd and Main," Marcus said, choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say the owner made it clear that I'm not welcome here." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Say no more," Jordan said, his tone serious now. "I'll be there in 20. Marcus hung up and folded his arms, staring at the store's entrance. He wasn't one to seek revenge or escalate conflicts unnecessarily, but he believed in accountability. Deborah needed to understand the impact of her actions, and Marcus knew just the person to help deliver the message. Back inside the store, Deborah continued with her routine, but the atmosphere had shifted. Tom finally mustered the courage to approach her. "Deborah," he began cautiously, "do you think maybe you were a little harsh back there?" Deborah spun around, glaring at him. "Harsh? Tom, I was protecting my business. People like him bring nothing but trouble." Tom frowned. "People like him? What does that even mean?" "You know exactly what it means," Deborah snapped. "That hat he was wearing, BLM, it's a political statement. And I don't want politics in my store." Tom shook his head. "Deborah, supporting equality isn't politics. It's basic human decency." Deborah rolled her eyes. "Spare me the lecture, Tom. If you don't like how I run my store, you're free to shop somewhere else." Tom sighed, realizing there was no reasoning with her. He turned away, feeling a pang of guilt for not doing more to stand up for Marcus. He knew he'd regret it later. Outside, Marcus was joined by Jordan, who arrived in a sleek black car that turned heads as it pulled into the parking lot. Jordan stepped out, his tailored suit and commanding presence immediately drawing attention. A well-known senator and advocate for social justice, Jordan was no stranger to conflict resolution, or making a statement when necessary. "Marcus," Jordan greeted warmly, clasping his hand. "Tell me everything." Marcus quickly recounted the events inside the store, keeping his tone measured but firm. Jordan listened intently, his expression hardening with each word. "Unbelievable," Jordan muttered when Marcus finished. "But unfortunately not surprising." Jordan straightened his jacket and nodded toward the store. "Let's go." As the two men entered, the bell above the door chimed again. Deborah looked up, her initial reaction one of annoyance at seeing Marcus return. But when she noticed Jordan, her demeanor shifted. She didn't recognize him right away, but there was something about his confident stride and piercing gaze that unsettled her. Back again? Deborah said coldly, directing her words at Marcus. I thought I made it clear? Jordan stepped forward, cutting her off. You made it very clear, ma'am. And that's precisely why we're here. Deborah blinked, taken aback by his authoritative tone. Who are you? She demanded, though her voice faltered slightly. Jordan Williams, he said, extending a hand she didn't take. Senator Jordan Williams. Perhaps you've heard of me? Deborah's face paled. The name was familiar, and now that she looked closer, she recognized him from news broadcasts and social media. A prominent figure in the fight for civil rights, Jordan was known for his eloquence, his determination, and his refusal to tolerate injustice. What are you doing here? Deborah stammered, suddenly nervous. I'm here to address the treatment of my friend Marcus, Jordan said evenly. I understand you refused him service based on his hat? Deborah bristled, trying to regain her composure. I didn't refuse him service because of his hat. I refused him service because I don't allow political statements in my store. Interesting, Jordan replied, his voice calm but carrying an edge. Because from what I understand, you singled him out the moment he walked in. Tell me, is that how you treat all your customers? Deborah opened her mouth to respond but hesitated, glancing around the store. Other customers were watching now, their curiosity piqued. Tom stood near the back, silently rooting for Jordan. I have the right to refuse service to anyone, Deborah said finally, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Jordan nodded. That's true. But let me ask you this. What message do you think that sends? When you refuse service to someone based on a symbol that represents equality and justice, what do you think people see? Deborah fidgeted, her confidence crumbling under his gaze. I don't see how that's any of your business. It became my business the moment you chose to make Marcus feel unwelcome, Jordan said firmly. And it's my responsibility to hold people like you accountable. The room was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Deborah glanced around, realizing she was losing the support of her remaining customers. Even those who might have agreed with her before were now uncomfortable with the way the conversation was unfolding. Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. I didn't come here to cause trouble. I just wanted to support a local business. But instead, I was met with hostility and disrespect. And unfortunately, that's an experience far too many people like me have had to endure. Deborah looked at him, her expression a mix of defensiveness and uncertainty. For the first time, she seemed to falter, realizing the gravity of the situation. Jordan's voice softened slightly, though it still carried its weight. It's not too late to make things right, Deborah. Apologize. Acknowledge your mistake and commit to doing better. Deborah hesitated, her pride warring with the growing realization that she was in the wrong. Finally, she muttered, I'm sorry. Marcus nodded, accepting the apology but knowing it was only the first step. Jordan turned to the other customers, addressing them as much as Deborah. Let this be a reminder that our actions matter. Every choice we make, every word we say, has the power to lift someone up or tear them down. Let's choose to be better. The store was silent as his words sank in. Deborah looked down, unable to meet his gaze. Marcus and Jordan turned to leave, their mission accomplished. As they stepped outside, the tension inside the store began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of reflection. Thank you, Marcus said to Jordan as they walked to their cars. Jordan smiled. Anytime, my friend. Sometimes it just takes a little push to open people's eyes. Marcus and Jordan's departure left a vacuum in the store. Customers exchanged uneasy glances, digesting what had just transpired. Deborah stood motionless behind the counter, her face flushed. The weight of what had happened was finally beginning to sink in. Tom, still lingering near the bread aisle, couldn't hold back any longer. He approached the counter cautiously, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. Deborah, he began, his voice measured but firm, that was something, wasn't it? Deborah snapped her gaze to him. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time to take a long, hard look at how you're running things around here, Tom said. That senator, he made some valid points. Deborah scoffed. Easy for you to say, Tom. You're not the one trying to keep a business afloat in a town where everyone wants to shove their agenda down your throat. Is it really about agendas, though? Tom pressed. Or is it about treating people with respect? You can disagree with someone without making them feel unwelcome. Deborah's lips tightened into a thin line. I don't need a lecture from you, Tom. Tom raised his hands in surrender. Fair enough. But just remember, the way you treat people has a way of coming back around. That's all I'll say. He turned and headed for the door, leaving Deborah alone with her thoughts. She glanced around the store, noticing how the remaining customers were either avoiding her gaze or whispering among themselves. The atmosphere had shifted dramatically and it wasn't in her favor. Outside, Marcus leaned against his car, watching as Jordan retrieved his phone from his pocket. "You sure you're good?" Jordan asked, his tone laced with genuine concern. Marcus nodded. "I'm used to it, unfortunately. But having you here? That made all the difference." Jordan placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You deserve better than used to it. This kind of behavior needs to be called out every time it happens. And if I have to spend the rest of my career showing up at little shops like this to make that point, so be it." Marcus chuckled softly. "Well, I appreciate it." "Really?" As they spoke, a sleek black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Marcus recognized it immediately. It belonged to Senator Jordan's staff. The back door opened and a young woman stepped out, clipboard in hand. "Senator," she greeted Jordan, her tone brisk and professional. "We're ready for the press conference downtown?" Jordan nodded. "Give me a few minutes." The mention of a press conference piqued Marcus's curiosity. "You've got something big planned?" Jordan smirked. "Let's just say this isn't the last time this store will hear about us." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're going public with this?" "Not directly," Jordan clarified. "But it'll come up. People need to know that this kind of thing is still happening in their communities. Change doesn't come from silence." Marcus nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. "Let me know how I can help." "You've already helped," Jordan said. "Just by standing your ground." As the SUV drove off with Jordan inside, Marcus lingered in the parking lot for a few moments. He thought about the countless other people who had faced similar treatment but didn't have the resources or connections to fight back. Determined to turn this moment into something positive, he pulled out his phone and opened his notes app. He began typing furiously, outlining an idea that had been simmering in the back of his mind for years. A grassroots initiative to support minority-owned businesses and educate communities about implicit bias. Inside the store, Deborah was pacing behind the counter, her anxiety mounting. She couldn't shake the image of Jordan's stern expression or the murmurs of her customers as they left. It was as if the walls of her once familiar shop were closing in on her. She knew she needed to do something to salvage her reputation, but what? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the doorbell chiming. A man in a crisp suit entered, his demeanor calm but authoritative. Deborah straightened up, instinctively smoothing her apron. "Good afternoon," the man said, approaching the counter. "Are you the owner of this establishment?" "Yes," Deborah replied cautiously. "What can I do for you?" The man extended a business card. "My name is Richard Caldwell. I'm with the Office of Civil Rights Advocacy. I understand there was an incident here earlier today involving Senator Jordan Williams and his associate, Marcus." Deborah's stomach dropped. I didn't realize this would escalate to that level." Richard raised an eyebrow. "When a public figure is involved, these things tend to gain attention. But I'm not here to cause trouble. I'd like to offer you an opportunity." Deborah blinked, confused. "An opportunity?" "Yes," Richard said. "Our office runs a community engagement program aimed at fostering dialogue and understanding. We offer workshops for business owners to learn about unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and how to create inclusive spaces." Deborah bristled. "I don't think I need." Richard held up a hand, cutting her off gently. "With all due respect, ma'am, I think today's events suggest otherwise. Participating in this program could be beneficial, not just for your business but for the community you serve." Deborah hesitated, her pride warring with the nagging realization that he was right. "Is it mandatory?" "No," Richard said. "But it's highly recommended. And if I may be blunt, refusing to participate could send the wrong message, not just to your customers but to the broader community." Deborah sighed, feeling cornered. "Fine. How do I sign up?" Richard handed her a pamphlet and smiled. "I'll be in touch to schedule your first session. Thank you for your time." As he left, Deborah slumped against the counter, overwhelmed by the day's events. She had always prided herself on her independence, her ability to run a business without interference. But now, for the first time, she felt the weight of accountability, and it was heavier than she'd ever imagined. Outside, Marcus watched as Richard exited the store. He felt a sense of vindication, knowing that steps were being taken to address what had happened. But he also knew the work was far from over. As he got into his car and started the engine, he made a silent promise to himself. He would turn this moment of pain into a catalyst for change. As Marcus drove away, his mind was filled with a mix of emotions: vindication, determination, and an undeniable sense of responsibility. He couldn't shake the feeling that what had happened today was more than just another unfortunate encounter. It was a call to action. Pulling into his driveway, he parked the car and sat for a moment, staring at his hands gripping the wheel. He thought about the countless others who didn't have someone like Jordan Williams to step in for them, who endured this kind of treatment silently, day after day. Once inside his modest home, Marcus immediately grabbed his laptop and began drafting an idea that had been swirling in his head for months: a community network called Bridge the Divide. The initiative would focus on connecting people of different backgrounds through workshops, community events, and support for minority-owned businesses. Marcus wanted to create something tangible, something that could turn his personal experience into a tool for education and change. Meanwhile, Senator Jordan Williams was busy with his own plans. After leaving the parking lot, he headed straight to a press conference already buzzing with reporters. The event was meant to address broader issues of racial equity and social justice, but after what had happened at the store, Jordan decided to shift the focus slightly. Standing at the podium with cameras flashing and microphones thrust toward him, Jordan began his speech. "Today, I had an experience that reminded me of why this work is so important," he said, his voice steady but impassioned. "It was a small moment in a small store, but it spoke volumes about the challenges we still face as a society. Bias, whether overt or subtle, continues to shape the way we treat one another. And that bias doesn't just hurt individuals, it weakens our communities." The crowd listened intently, sensing the weight of his words. Jordan continued, "This is not about vilifying anyone. It's about education, understanding, and accountability. It's about creating spaces where everyone feels valued and respected, regardless of the color of their skin, the clothes they wear, or the beliefs they hold." He went on to announce a new initiative, a partnership between his office and several advocacy groups to fund programs that combat racial bias in small businesses. The program would include grants for minority entrepreneurs, mandatory cultural sensitivity training for businesses seeking state contracts, and a hotline for reporting discrimination. As the press conference aired live, Deborah sat in her living room, her television tuned to the local news. She watched in stunned silence as Jordan spoke, his words cutting through her defenses. She had never considered herself a bad person, but now she was being confronted with the reality that her actions, or inactions, had consequences far beyond her intentions. The phone rang, jolting her from her thoughts. It was her sister Linda. "Deborah, are you seeing this?" Linda asked, her voice tinged with both concern and urgency. "Yes, I'm watching," Deborah replied. "You really stepped in it this time," Linda said. "What were you thinking, treating someone like that? Especially someone connected to a senator?" "I wasn't thinking," Deborah admitted, her voice cracking. I didn't realize who he was." "That's the problem, Deb," Linda said sharply. "It shouldn't matter who he is. Everyone deserves respect." Deborah felt a lump rise in her throat. "I know. I messed up. But what am I supposed to do now?" "You start by apologizing," Linda said. "Not just to Marcus and that senator, but to your customers, your community. And then you make it right. However you can." Deborah hung up, her sister's words echoing in her mind. Apologizing had never been easy for her. She was stubborn, set in her ways, and hated admitting when she was wrong. But this time she knew Linda was right. If she didn't take steps to make amends, her business, and her reputation, might not survive. The next morning, Deborah opened her store early and began drafting a handwritten apology. She didn't know Marcus's address or how to contact him directly, so she planned to leave the note with Jordan's office. In it, she expressed her regret, acknowledged her actions, and pledged to participate in the community engagement program Richard Caldwell had mentioned. As she was sealing the envelope, the doorbell jingled. She looked up to see Marcus standing in the doorway holding a stack of flyers. His expression was calm but firm. "Good morning," Marcus said. Deborah blinked, caught off guard. "Good morning. What brings you here?" "I wanted to drop these off," Marcus said, stepping forward and placing the flyers on the counter. "It's for a new initiative I'm starting. It's called Bridge the Divide. It's about fostering understanding and supporting inclusivity in our community." Deborah picked up one of the flyers, her eyes scanning the bold lettering and colorful design. This is your project?" "Yes," Marcus said. "I figured if I can't change everyone's mindset, at least I can start somewhere." Deborah hesitated, then gestured to the envelope on the counter. "I was just about to deliver this to Senator Williams. It's an apology for what happened yesterday." Marcus glanced at the envelope, then back at Deborah. "That's a start," he said. "But actions speak louder than words. If you're serious about making a change, I'd love for you to attend one of our workshops." Deborah swallowed hard, her pride battling with her sense of obligation. "I'll think about it." Marcus nodded. "That's all I'm asking." As he left the store, Deborah felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She realized that change wasn't just about making amends for the past, it was about building a better future. The days following Marcus's visit to the store felt like a whirlwind for Deborah. She had spent years running her small business with a mindset she now realized was narrow and exclusionary, though she never thought of it that way before. The weight of her actions lingered on her mind as she decided it was time to turn things around. The flyers Marcus had left behind sat on her kitchen table, staring back at her as though daring her to follow through with his challenge. Deborah picked up her phone and called her sister Linda. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began. Linda's tone softened on the other end of the line. "And? I want to go to that workshop Marcus mentioned. The Bridge the Divide thing. I need to start somewhere," Deborah admitted, her voice faltering slightly. "That's a good first step, Deb. It's not just about attending though. You need to listen, learn, and apply what you hear," Linda said firmly. Deborah exhaled, a heavy sigh of both relief and apprehension. "I know. I feel like people will hate me for what I did." "They might," Linda replied honestly. "But what matters is that you're trying to make amends. That's the only way to regain trust." The workshop was scheduled for that Saturday at a local community center. Deborah spent the week preparing, not just for the workshop but for what she felt might be a moment of reckoning. She shut the store down early each day to read up on cultural sensitivity, inclusivity, and the history of systemic racism. It was uncomfortable, often confronting her with truths she had ignored or dismissed in the past. But she pushed through, knowing it was necessary. When Saturday finally arrived, Deborah dressed modestly and drove to the community center, her palms slick with sweat as she gripped the steering wheel. As she pulled into the parking lot, she noticed a crowd gathering by the entrance. People of all ages, ethnicities, and backgrounds were mingling, chatting, and holding hands. Deborah suddenly felt out of place, her usual confidence shrinking in the face of such diversity. She hesitated in her car, watching as Marcus arrived. He stood tall, greeting attendees with a warm smile and handing out name tags. His charisma was magnetic, drawing people to him effortlessly. Just as Deborah considered turning around and driving home, Marcus's eyes locked with hers. He smiled and gave her a small nod as if to say, "It's okay. Come in." Deborah stepped out of her car, clutching her purse tightly as she approached the entrance. Marcus greeted her with the same warmth he showed everyone else. "Deborah, I'm glad you came," he said, handing her a name tag. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for inviting me." Inside, the room was set up with chairs arranged in a circle. A large banner on the wall read, "Building Bridges, One Step at a Time." Deborah took a seat near the back, trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible. Marcus stood at the center of the circle, welcoming everyone and explaining the purpose of the workshop. "This isn't about blaming or shaming anyone," he began. "It's about understanding each other's experiences, our biases, and how we can move forward together." The first activity involved pairing up with someone you didn't know and sharing a personal story about a time you felt misunderstood or judged. Deborah was paired with a woman named Rosa, a middle-aged Latina who owned a bakery in the neighboring town. Rosa spoke first, recounting an experience where a customer had refused to buy her pastries simply because they assumed she wasn't American enough to make traditional recipes. "I felt so small," Rosa said, her voice trembling. "It wasn't just about the pastries. It was about my worth as a person." Deborah listened intently, her heart sinking as she realized how much her own actions might have made someone else feel the same way. When it was her turn to share, Deborah hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I've been the one doing the judging," she admitted. "Just last week, I treated a customer poorly because of my own assumptions about him. And now I'm here trying to make it right." Rosa nodded thoughtfully. "It's good that you're here. Admitting you were wrong is the first step." The workshop continued with more activities, each one peeling back layers of preconceptions and challenging participants to confront their biases. Deborah found herself opening up more than she expected, sharing stories, asking questions, and genuinely listening to others. By the end of the day, she felt emotionally drained but also lighter, as though a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. As the workshop concluded, Marcus stood up to address the group one last time. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he said. "It's a journey, a series of choices we make every day. But when we choose to listen, to understand, and to act with compassion, we start to build a better world for everyone." The room erupted into applause and Deborah found herself clapping along, her eyes welling up with tears. For the first time in years she felt a sense of hope, not just for herself but for her community. After the workshop, Marcus approached her. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Tired," Deborah admitted with a small laugh. "But also, hopeful. Thank you for doing this. It's opened my eyes in ways I didn't expect." Marcus smiled. "That's all I could ask for." Over the next few weeks, Deborah committed herself to change. She implemented new policies at her store, including a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and mandatory sensitivity training for her staff. She also began stocking products from local minority-owned businesses, giving them a platform to reach a broader audience. Word of Deborah's efforts began to spread, and slowly but surely, customers started to return. Among them was Marcus, who walked in one afternoon wearing his BLM hat with pride. Deborah greeted him warmly, offering a handshake. "Welcome back," she said. Marcus shook her hand, a genuine smile on his face. "Thank you, Deborah. It's good to be here." As he browsed the aisles, Deborah felt a sense of pride, not in herself but in the journey she had embarked on. She knew there was still much work to be done, but for the first time she felt ready to face it head-on. Deborah's transformation wasn't just a personal journey, it began to ripple outward, impacting her community in unexpected ways. As customers noticed the changes in her store, they began talking about it with friends and family. What once had been a place overshadowed by exclusion and discomfort now started to emerge as a hub of inclusion and diversity. One morning, Deborah arrived at her store to find a note taped to the door. It was handwritten on lined paper, the edges frayed from being torn out of a notebook. She unfolded it carefully and read the words. "Dear Miss Deborah, thank you for making your store a place where I feel welcome. My mom and I have been coming here for years, but there were times we felt out of place. Now it feels like home. Keep doing what you're doing. You're making a difference." A grateful customer. Deborah stood there for a moment, the note trembling slightly in her hands. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything to her. She taped the note to the counter inside as a reminder of why she had chosen to change. Her newfound commitment to inclusivity extended beyond her store. Deborah began attending community meetings and events, often alongside Marcus. Together, they worked to bridge divides within the town, organizing workshops, cultural festivals, and fundraisers for local causes. Deborah found herself reconnecting with neighbors she hadn't spoken to in years, building relationships she never thought possible. At one such event, a town hall meeting focused on improving race relations, Deborah mustered the courage to speak. She stood at the podium, her hands gripping the edges as she looked out at the crowd. "I'm not proud of the person I used to be," she began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "But I'm here to tell you that change is possible. It's not easy and it's not quick, but it's worth it. We all have the power to make our community a better place, and it starts with looking in the mirror." The room was silent for a moment before a wave of applause swept through it. Marcus, sitting in the front row, gave her a nod of encouragement. After the meeting, a young woman approached Deborah. She introduced herself as Elena, a local college student studying social work. "I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your story," Elena said. "It takes a lot of courage to admit when you're wrong and to work to make things right." Deborah smiled. "Thank you, Elena. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that courage comes from the people around you. I couldn't have done this alone." As time went on, Deborah's efforts began to attract attention from beyond the town. A local newspaper published a feature story about her store's transformation, highlighting her partnership with Marcus and the impact they were making together. The article caught the eye of a regional news station, which sent a reporter to interview them. The day of the interview, Deborah felt a mix of excitement and nerves. She had never been one to seek the spotlight, but she knew this was an opportunity to share a message of hope and change. The reporter, a cheerful woman named Sarah, set up her camera in the store's front aisle. "So, Deborah," she began, "what inspired you to make these changes?" Deborah took a deep breath. "It started with a mistake," she admitted. "I let my biases get the better of me and I hurt someone in the process. But instead of letting that define me, I chose to learn from it. Marcus showed me that it's never too late to change, and I wanted to create a space where everyone feels welcome." Marcus, who was standing beside her, added, "Deborah's journey is proof that when we listen to each other and work together, we can break down barriers and build something better. It's not about perfection, it's about progress." The interview aired that evening and the response was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in from viewers who were inspired by Deborah's story. Some shared their own experiences of prejudice and redemption, while others simply expressed gratitude for her willingness to change. Among the messages was one that stood out. It was from a woman named Claire, who identified herself as the owner of a small chain of grocery stores in a neighboring state. "Your story moved me," Claire wrote. "I've faced similar challenges in my own business, and I'd love to collaborate with you to expand this message of inclusion. Let's talk." Deborah reached out to Claire, and the two began brainstorming ways to take their efforts to the next level. They envisioned a regional campaign called Open Doors, Open Hearts, aimed at promoting diversity and inclusion in small businesses. The campaign would include workshops, resource guides, and a certification program for businesses that met certain inclusivity standards. The campaign launched 6 months later with a kickoff event at Deborah's store. The parking lot was transformed into a festive gathering space, complete with food trucks, live music, and activities for kids. Marcus served as the MC, his charisma once again shining as he rallied the crowd. As Deborah looked out at the sea of faces, people of all backgrounds coming together in celebration, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was more than she had ever imagined when she first decided to change. It was a movement and she was proud to be a part of it. By the end of the event, Deborah found herself standing next to Marcus, a contented smile on her face. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" she asked. Marcus chuckled. "Honestly? No. But I'm glad we did." Deborah nodded, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "Me too." The journey of the Open Doors, Open Hearts campaign reached its crescendo as Deborah stood on a stage at a national gala, an event organized to celebrate initiatives making strides in diversity and inclusion. The venue sparkled with grandeur, chandeliers casting warm light, tables adorned with delicate floral arrangements, and an audience filled with people from all walks of life. Among them were CEOs, community leaders, and advocates who had all been inspired by the program. Marcus, sitting in the front row, gave Deborah an encouraging nod. His unwavering support had been her anchor throughout this transformative journey. As she adjusted the microphone, she felt a swell of emotion, knowing this moment was not just about her but about everyone who had believed in the power of change. "Good evening," Deborah began, her voice steady and resonant. "When I started this journey, I was a different person. Someone who made mistakes, let biases cloud my judgment, and, most importantly, failed to see the humanity in others. But those mistakes became my greatest teachers. They forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself and the world we live in." She paused, scanning the room, her gaze landing briefly on Marcus. The Open Doors, Open Hearts campaign was born from those lessons. It's not just about inclusivity as a buzzword or a trend. It's about fundamentally rethinking how we treat one another, whether in business, in our communities, or in our daily lives. And tonight, I'm proud to share that this campaign has reached over 500 businesses and directly impacted thousands of lives. The audience erupted into applause, but Deborah wasn't done. "None of this would have been possible without the people who challenged me to be better. People like Marcus who didn't let me stay comfortable in my ignorance. Change is rarely easy, but it's always worth it." After her speech, Deborah was approached by countless attendees, each eager to share their own stories or find ways to collaborate. Among them was a representative from a major international corporation who expressed interest in adopting the program globally. "We believe your campaign could have a massive impact on our operations," the representative said. "Let's schedule a meeting to discuss how we can bring Open Doors, Open Hearts to a worldwide audience." Deborah's heart raced with excitement. The idea of taking her initiative global was something she had never dared to dream of, yet here it was, within reach. She agreed, knowing this was the next step in a journey that had already surpassed her wildest expectations. As the gala wound down, Deborah and Marcus found a quiet corner to reflect. The weight of the evening's achievements settled over them, a mix of pride and gratitude. "You've come a long way, Deborah," Marcus said, his tone warm. "From a small store owner to someone changing the world." Deborah smiled, her eyes glistening. "I couldn't have done it without you, Marcus. You were the one who made me see that change was possible." Their moment of reflection was interrupted by a young woman who approached them hesitantly. She held a small notebook, its cover worn from use. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice tinged with nervousness. "I just wanted to say thank you. Your campaign inspired me to start a similar initiative in my town, and it's already making a difference. I thought you should know." Deborah's heart swelled with pride as she shook the woman's hand. "That means the world to me. Keep going, you're part of something bigger than any one of us." The woman nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude, before retreating into the crowd. Deborah turned back to Marcus, a sense of fulfillment washing over her. "Moments like that," she said, remind me why we started this. It's not about accolades or recognition. It's about creating a world where everyone feels valued. Marcus raised his glass in a toast. To open doors and open hearts. Deborah clinked her glass against his, the sound a quiet affirmation of their shared mission. The gala may have been the culmination of one chapter, but it was clear their story was far from over. The journey of change and compassion would continue, touching lives in ways they could only begin to imagine. As the night drew to a close, Deborah stepped outside, the cool evening air a welcome reprieve. She looked up at the stars, feeling a profound sense of connection, to Marcus, to the people they had helped, and to the countless others who would carry this mission forward. In that moment, Deborah knew with certainty, the work they had started was bigger than them and it would live on, a testament to the power of transformation, empathy, and the enduring belief that change is always possible.